We want to get started back again with our study in 1 Corinthians. We're taking a break. Well, actually, we took a break from 1 Corinthians to address that horrendous Supreme Court ruling, just the latest in a series of many. And speaking of that Supreme Court ruling, this is not the first time. But this is what we can expect when the Christians decide that they're better off leaving the Canaanites run the culture. And that's exactly what we've been having here for years. So we can't be surprised at what's happening. Shame on us. But now we're back to, shall we say, a similar passage, if you will. Turn, if you would, to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. We're going to pick up where we left off. And we're going to look at verse 25 through 40. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 25 through 40. And we're going to look at a passage that we would consider perhaps a little bit, what might not make exactly perfect sense to us. And we'll try to explain it in context this morning. And try to point out that what Paul is saying is very relevant to us, even though we might feel like we could read this whole passage and say, thanks, Paul, but I already knew all of that. But let's read it, and we'll try to do our best to explain this morning. Principles for this is for the folks that are not married. We already saw a series of statements for the married. Now we're going to get to the unmarried, especially those who are unmarried ladies. Now concerning virgins, verse 25 of 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. I suppose therefore that this is good because of the present distress, that it is good for a man to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But even if you do marry, you have not sinned, and if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Therefore, such will have trouble in the flesh, but I would spare you. This I say, brethren, the time is short, so that from now on, even those who have wives should be as though they had none. And those who weep as though they did not weep. Those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice. Those who buy as though they did not possess. Those who use this world as not misusing it, for the form of this world is passing away. But I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. There is a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy, both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I say for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you, but for what is proper, that you may serve the Lord without distraction. But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly toward his virgin, if she is past the flower of youth, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin, let them marry. Nevertheless, he who stands steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but has power over his own will, and has so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin, does well. So that he who gives her to marriage does well, and he who does not give her in marriage does better. A wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives, but if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. She is happier if she remains as she is, according to my judgment. I think that I also have the Spirit of God. Well, a lot there, but it seems like we could just kind of wrap up what Paul said in just a couple of sentences. 1 Corinthians, of course, one of the longest books of the New Testament. Why does Paul take so much ink to say something that sounds about like this? I recommend that you're not married, but go ahead and marry if you want to. That's pretty much what he's saying here. Paul, why did you have to take so long to say it? Well, our idea this morning that we want to talk about, we want to get across this morning, is that God speaks to the small things as they are connected to the big things. One of the reasons why idols make sense, and we're going to talk about idolatry this morning, because we're going to see that what Paul is saying this morning is connected to the problem of idolatry. It's closely connected to it. And one of the nice things about an idol is they only care about the big things. You see, since they're dumb and deaf and blind, they have to be told everything they're supposed to be concerned about. You ever think about that? An idol can't know anything on its own. So the people come up with their gifts to the idol's, cut out of wood or rock or whatever it is. And the petitioner comes up to the idol and asks the or tells the idol what they want the idol to do for them. A good crop, more money, healthy family, or whatever. See, the idols don't care about the small things. That's the nice thing about an idol, isn't it? Our God cares about the small things. Even this passage that we have, with all this ink, talking about what we would call a small thing, but it's not a small thing. It's a very big thing. After all, we're talking about marriage here, we're talking about family, without which the world cannot go on. I've often thought, I might have mentioned it before, about that island of Lesbos in Greece, where apparently all those women who were perverted spent their time and wanted to live. But have you ever thought about what that island would have looked like after a while, with no young people? Just growing older and older and older, and finally just dying off horrifically, sort of alone. So while we might say that Paul's talking about the small things here, he's talking about a big thing. He's literally talking this morning about the future of Christianity and civilization. Because they are one and the same, don't you know? There's no such thing as civilization without the Christian influence, at least at the beginning. It can go on by itself for a while, but not for long. God speaks to the small things. Today's passage seems to be comparatively trivial. I say it seems. Up to this point, we've been dealing with bigger topics, such as the proclamation of a crucified Christ. We talk about that extensively. But Paul did not come to Corinth preaching a general Jesus. He came preaching a crucified Christ. He talked about the need to grow up. And Paul smacked him around pretty good because he said, I want to talk to you people as grown-ups and I can't do it. And we also talk about church discipline, which is also a big deal and important. Now we're talking about something that seems to be trivial. But we turn to a subject that almost seems self-explanatory. What to do about young ladies, virgins who are unmarried. It seems as if Paul gives a lot of space here to a topic that can be handled in a verse or two. Upon closer examination, we will see that Paul is making a point that goes far beyond the immediate subject. He's talking here about foundational topics. That is, he has reduced the discussion of doctrine to a practical level. What to do about the unmarried. Now, we're going to talk about some specific items here in the passage, but what I talked about there and what I talked about earlier, I want to address. I said earlier that as a pastor, I can work out all the problems in my ivory tower. Now, that's not to say that I'm not thankful for books, because I am. I'm one of those guys that I have to have books. I have to be able to read them, and I'm so grateful for those who wrote them. The good ones anyway. The bad ones you can keep, and there's plenty of them. So I'm grateful for those. So it's not like the people that write books don't do anything. They do. They do an awful lot. But if our book knowledge, my friends, cannot come down to where we live, then our books are useless. And I'm saying that deliberately. Our books are useless. Be ye doers of the word and not hearers only. You see, the book is a hearer. I read a good book. But if I can't do that book, if that book does not come down to where I live, what good is the book? Congratulations. You're a hearer, but not a doer. Or, we won't turn to it, but how about what Christ said there in Matthew 7? The difference, once again, between the wise man and the foolish man was not what they heard. They both heard. Remember what Christ said? He who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them, I will liken to a foolish man. Then he went on to say, he who hears these sayings of mine and does do them, I will liken to a wise man. You see, we often think about these kinds of things, say, well, if I hear things, if I hear the right things, then I'll be wise. But wisdom, in this context at least, is not about what we hear. Wisdom is what we do about what we hear. Ultimately, every word of this book comes down to some practical level of how we behave and how we interact. We read earlier this morning from Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy being a, shall we say, a second law, a second law, if you will, not a second law, but Moses' explanation of the law. And we see in Deuteronomy that Moses spends an awful lot of time on what they're supposed to do about the law they already are supposed to know. Deuteronomy is full of that all throughout the book. This is how you act. This is what you do now because of what you already know. Well, here, then, we come to this passage, which seems to waste space, if you will. Of course, it does not. Seems to say some things that don't make a whole lot of sense at first glance. The first thing I want to say about this is that, and you'll hear pastors say all the time, the word context, get tired of hearing it. But our passage this morning, if there was ever a passage that screamed, understand the context, it is this one. This should be, I hope for the rest of your life, 1 Corinthians 7, whenever you get into a discussion about context and how important it is, this is where you want to go. I'll tell you why. How many of you have ever been in a discussion about marriage, about family, about getting married, and someone says, well, Paul said it's better not to be married. And you go to 1 Corinthians 7 to prove it. Let me see those hands. I know they're out there. I've heard it myself. Well, Paul says this. Don't get married. Well, indeed, it sure does. It appears as if he's saying, and he is saying that. He is. But we must ask ourselves, why is he saying it? And there's a small phrase in this passage, with just one quick phrase, that I would argue this morning that if you don't get this phrase, you're not going to get the passage at all. And here's the phrase. It's in verse 26. I suppose, therefore, that this is good. Read that next phrase. Because of the present distress. See, Paul is giving this advice about marriage because of the present distress. And if you don't understand that what follows through verse 25, verse 40 is because of the present distress, then you get into endless arguments about married, not married. Paul says, blah, blah. No. Paul is giving very specific advice here because of the present distress that they knew what he was talking about. Now, what we'd like to do is we'd like to quickly go through this passage, explain some of these verses here, and then look at some larger lessons that I believe this passage teaches us. Larger lessons about our life and about our ministry and about our service towards each other and towards God. First of all, verse 25, concerning virgins, I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. Kind of an odd verse. Hey, Paul. Or we would say odd verse. Hey, Paul. If you don't have a command from the Lord, then what are you talking for? Well, here's why he's talking. Read the rest of the verse. As one whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. We run into questions all the time, do we not? Where we just struggle to find specific scripture to address it exactly. Well, if we don't have it, you know where we can go to? We can go to those whose judgment is worthy to be listened to, whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. I hope those are the kind of people you go to for advice. I hope those are the kind of people you go to for input. There are people that I trust you know who the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy and who are able to give judgment. You know why? because they know the Word of God, because they've lived and done the Scriptures. See, what happened to me, I'll give you just if you'll don't mind a personal illustration here. I know we give that from time to time, but way back when I was a youth pastor in a mainstream Arminian dispensational church, if you will. Can you imagine I was a youth pastor at one time? Anyway, I was for 4.5 years. Some of it was good, until I realized that the idea of a youth group was very godly. God is definitely in favor of youth groups. He calls them families. That was a little bit of a revelation for me. Someday I'll talk about that journey. Someday. It was a good one. In any case, so what happened during that time was, again, I would read books, and I came to realize that we often look up to people who are the conference speakers who seem to have it all together. But I realized that a lot of these people that are speaking, maybe they're writing, they're talking, I didn't know them. I did not know what they did, and I still remember the shock that I felt when I had read a book called Ordering Your Private World. It was a book written in the late 70s, early 80s, and I was so impressed with that book. I thought that the writer of that book really had things together, and then found out later that even while he was writing the book, he was actually in an adulterous relationship. You see, oftentimes these people that can give judgment and have done, see, you hear a good speaker, and please listen to me with this on this, folks. We can hear a good speaker and we know that he's speaking well, but we don't know what he's doing most of the time, do we? Because it's so far away from us. And there was a man in the church that I attended. He was a farmer. And don't take this for an example, but he fell asleep during every service. Everyone. But he was a farmer, and he was a dairy farmer. And the only thing about dairy farmers, that's 24/7 work, right there. And rightly or wrongly, I came to admire this man. He was an honest man. He was not a cheater. He worked extremely hard, and he was simple. And I literally came to regard this man as a good man that I want to talk to and find out things about, because I could tell he would never get in front of people and speak. He'd never have a private jet and go around and be the big shot at conferences. But he was a man who did. In his dealings with his family, he took care of his wife, he took care of his family, and he worked hard. We're going to come back to that a little bit later. And I came to admire this man, and to this day, this man is still a hero in my mind. Because as far as I knew, he never veered off that path. Later on, he came to have a problem with when he tried to sell his farm, and land taxes and property taxes and all that kind of stuff. And I felt that he was horribly abused, but that's a different story. He was an honest, good man who did what he was asked and what his duty was. He was a trustworthy man. It is legitimate to get advice from those who God has had mercy on and who are trustworthy. I hope every man and woman this morning are striving to be that person. A person who has experienced mercy, and a person who is trustworthy and who can help the next generation. Now this verse 26 then. I suppose therefore that this is good because of the present distress, and it is good for man to remain as he is. What kind of present distress are we talking about here? Because of the present distress, that it is good for man to remain as he is. And of course he's going to explain this to women as well. What present distress? There's always distress, right? Need to fix the brakes, the car. Roof has sprung a leak. summer camp, where's that money going to come from? There's always a distress somewhere, but that's not what he's talking about here. I actually believe he's talking about something far greater here, the present distress. It has to be a distress that is so great that Paul was going to argue against getting married without a specific command from the Lord. What kind of a distress could that be? Well, I would have to say that the kind of distress that has to be would be the type of a distress wherein a man would be worried about what's going to happen to his wife and children. It would be that type of a distress. One of the reasons why many of the early missionaries never married. John Calvin started an academy, and young men came and learned. Many of them went to France to minister. Back in those days, if you were going to France to minister and you left John Calvin's seminary, it might be a good plan not to be married because you probably weren't coming back. And some did not. So what distress are we talking about? A distress so great that Paul says you're better off not marrying. And by extension, we can conclude that those listeners would understand what he was talking about and would understand why it'd be better not to marry, because you would be concerned about your wife and your children, what would happen to them. Well, let's turn to Acts chapter 4 and see if we can find this out here. We'll look at verse 32 here in a minute. But let's ask this question in the meantime. What did Christ say was going to happen to Jerusalem? Christ did predict the destruction of Jerusalem, did he not? Now, you're a Jewish person. Part of your job living in that area was to travel to Jerusalem at least yearly, in some occasions 3 times a year. We saw in Acts 2 on the day of Pentecost that Jerusalem was so important that Luke tells us that there were Jews from all over the world at Pentecost in Acts 2 to hear Peter's sermon. Jerusalem's pretty important. And when you look at where they came from, Libya, I mean, that's a pretty good distance. Some may have come from as far as Ethiopia. We're not sure about that. They came from the north as well. Appears that they came from parts of Europe, certainly Asia Minor. A long distance just to come back to Jerusalem. And Jesus Christ said when he was here, this place, Jerusalem, is going to be destroyed. And it's going to come on this generation. Now, let me ask you. If you heard a prediction like that from a man who also predicted that he'd be dead and he'd be alive 3 days later, what would you think about a prediction that Jerusalem, your city, was going to be destroyed? Might you take it seriously? Yeah. Yeah, you would. Destroy it. Now, what would you do if you had property in that city? You might want to think about it. Do I really want to make long-term investments, at least right now? Well, this is what we see happening in Acts 4:32. Peter and John have just been let out of prison. In verse 25, we see the people praying, and they pray Psalm 2. And then they make the application, and they pray for boldness. And in verse 32, this is the early church. Now the multitude of Acts 4, verse 32. Now the multitude of those who believed were of one heart and of one soul. Neither did anyone say that any of the things he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. And with great power the apostles gave witness to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. Nor was there anyone among them who lacked, for all who were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the proceeds of the things that were sold. And they laid them at the apostles' feet. We read that there. I'm going to read that again. And they distributed each as anyone had need. And Joseph, who was also named Barnabas by the apostles, which is translated son of encouragement, a Levite of the country of Cyprus, having went and sold it, and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. Now what's going on? Do we just need enough money here? Is this like a grand welfare program happening here? Well, it's a church-sponsored welfare program, to be sure. But there's something far greater going on here. These people are reacting to what Christ had said. Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. This was the church at Jerusalem at the time. And so far from some Christian communism thing going on here, we can talk about that another time. It says they sold the things they possessed. And no socialist can make peace with a statement like that, that I know of. They sold the things they possessed, gave the funds to the apostles, and the apostles distributed them. But it sure sounds like a lot greater than just somebody needing a bite to eat. They're selling land. Land, usually, especially in a place like Jerusalem, valuable real estate. There's a lot of money flying around here. It's much greater than just what I'm going to eat for supper. But what are they doing? What's happening here is these people have taken what Christ has said seriously. And they're doing the right thing. They're taking their assets they have in the land that Christ said would be destroyed, and they're turning it into liquid. What's happening? They're turning it into something they can take with them. Why? Remember what Christ said about the destruction of Jerusalem? Did he say, hang out in Jerusalem and be destroyed and be killed? No. He said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, at that point, get out and get to the mountains. So what they're doing here is they're taking their hard assets, turning them into liquid so they can have something after the crisis is over. You see, when Paul then in Corinthians talks about this present distress, when you're talking about, think about this. Let's say someone were to say today, within this generation, I was going to say Washington, D.C. would be destroyed, but I was trying to think of something bad. No, I'm just kidding. Philadelphia, let's say. Will be destroyed. There'll be no more Philadelphia. It's going to be wiped off totally. Wiped off the map. Well, how would you react to that if you really believed that was true? Somebody said Philadelphia, trustworthy person, Philadelphia could be destroyed. Would that change the way you saw Philadelphia and how you would interact with all your dealings that have to do with Philadelphia? Yes, it would. And you would say, you know what, it's not just Philadelphia. There's going to be repercussions throughout Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey, and Maryland. And you would wonder what else is going to be destroyed along with it. And if you know what happened during those years, between the time that they rejected Christ in 70 AD, things were really bad in Palestine. You see, we tend to have this idea that afterwards they rejected Christ, but things went smoothly after that until Jerusalem was destroyed. But that's not the way it was. They turned against God, and God sent various judgments against them. And they kept on losing war after war after war. Finally, in 70 AD, those who were left came to Jerusalem, and they said, God will never destroy Jerusalem. This is where his temple is. And so they were trusting in the temple to save them from destruction. And of course, if they would have read the Old Testament, they would have known God had said, you've seen what I've done to Bethel, which meant house of God. He said that to those in the southern kingdom. And I will destroy it, and I will destroy all you who turn against me. Be quite distressing. Quite distressing if we heard that Jerusalem, or Philadelphia, was going to be destroyed. And that would have repercussions all throughout the area. So going back to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, when Paul talks about this present distress, I believe what he's talking about there is the distress that Christ talked about would come on Jerusalem and its environment. Well, we took a little more time introducing our passage than we thought we would this morning. or I thought we would. I want to just, we're going to talk about the larger principles next week. Let's quickly go through, explain the passage, and there are at least some parts of the passage, and we'll wrap the rest of it up next week. I was thinking of biting off more than I could chew here, and then I did it anyway, and now I bit off more than I could chew. Anyway, I want to look at these next verses, which would seem to be difficult to understand, but I think are very easy to understand once we come to grips with the present distress. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loosed. Are you loosed from a wife? Do not seek a wife. Why is he saying these things? Well, from Albert Barnes, I want to address this. And why is Paul talking this? He says, whether it was proper that those who had unmarried daughters or wards should give them in marriage, that was the question. The reason why this question was proposed may have been that many in the church of Corinth were advocates of celibacy, and this perhaps on a couple of different grounds. Now, we have to back up here a little bit and ask ourselves, what's with this advocation of celibacy thing? That might sound a little bit foreign to our ears, but in church history, we have had movements, have we not, of celibacy movements. That you're more spiritual somehow if you're not married. Remember the Quakers? Actually, the Shakers, excuse me. Shakers were those folks, read about them sometime, those folks that felt that you could tell when the Holy Spirit was on them because they begin to shake. Now, how shaking can help me in my battles with the world, the flesh, and the devil is more than I can figure out. Now, I really shook last night. I don't have a problem with lust anymore. I don't see that happening. But one of the problems with the Shakers was they didn't believe in marriage. They were celibates. So they lasted on their converts. Look at that. That could be a horn. Well done. Ryan, if we can edit that out.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just kidding. Thank you. That's the first time that's happened. Hey, there's far worse things that can happen, that's for sure. Yeah. So the Shakers lasted as long as they could get converts, but they did believe in having children, so you aren't going to find, First Shaker Church of, Reading, Pennsylvania. We have another example a lot closer to us, right here in Ephrata, do we not? The Ephrata Cloister. The folks there didn't believe in marriage. You can see why the Ephrata Cloister is now a museum rather than a thriving community, right? Not that hard to figure out. There have been movements in Christian history that were saying, hey, you shouldn't be married. And Barnes is saying that this thought may have been in Corinth. I think he's correct. Some may have already been the advocates for celibacy and have maintained that the state was more favorable to piety and was altogether to be preferred. It is known that the opinion had an early prevalence and gave rise to the establishment of nunneries in the papal church, an opinion that has everywhere been attended with licentiousness and corruption, which is quite true. Wherever you find this idea that you should get married, you find great corruption going on behind the scenes. It is not improbable that there may have been advocates for this opinion, even in the Church of Corinth, and it was well, therefore, that the authority of an apostle should be employed to sanction and to honor the marriage union. So Paul is coming along to people who say, hey, it's impious, it's unholy to be married. He's coming along to say it's a good thing. Now to wrap up here real quickly, verse 29, but this I say, brethren, and here we have another very important phrase in this context. The time is short. Please, when you read this passage, do not forget these phrases. The present distress and the time is short. He's talking about the time then. The time was short. Judgment fell. So that from now on, even those who have wives should be as though they have none. I want to explain these verses here, which seem kind of odd. And those who weep as though they did not weep, those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice, those who buy as though they did not possess, those who use this world as not misusing it, for the form of this world is passing away. What's he talking about here? Those who weep as though they do not. What's he saying? Well, very quickly, because he's saying, he starts out with saying, this I say, brother, the time is short, so from now on, moving forward here, even those who have wives should be as though they had none. Those who weep as though they do not weep. What's up with this? Paul, what are you talking about? Well, it seems as if, maybe that's not the way I would want to say it, but it certainly does appear that Paul is saying to these folks, look, there's present distress. There's destruction coming. We don't know when it's coming. It's going to be short. This is how you have to react. Those who weep as though they did not weep, those his wives as though they had none. Because of this distress and this difficulty that's coming on you, you are not going to be able to pay the attention to your family that you would like to. You are not going to be able to display the emotions that you would like to, that you normally would. Give you a quick example. When my nephew died in February of like 5-6 years ago of leukemia, my brother, whose son it was, mentioned to me what it was so sad to have his son die. And it affected him greatly. But he was trying to get a perspective on it. He said, he said, my son, he knew at that point his son was going to die. It was leukemia, it was just killing his son. But my brother said, he said, truly, what a blessing it is to have my son die surrounded by people that love him and surrounded by people that can give him the best care. You and I know that we don't always die that way, right? And when things get bad, sometimes you die alone. And you have to make decisions that are based on real practical needs. When your son dies, or someone dies in a hospital or whatever, and you see it coming, you can get your emotions in check, and you can grieve like you should. But in a distressful situation where people are dying all around you, and there's things being destroyed, and your life is being turned upside down, at that point you don't have time to think about the emotion. You don't have time to be sad. You've got another crisis just right in front of you. And I think Paul here, by the things that he's saying, is building up the point. Difficult times are coming. He's saying, I do not want to tell you not to be married. But I do want to tell you that difficult times are coming. And this is how you have to look at things as these times come. Things are going to change for you. And you're not going to be able to interact as husbands and wives as you have in the past. Finally, those who use this world as not misusing it, verse 31, for the form of this world is passing away. What's he saying as not misusing it? Well, I believe what he's saying there is what they did what we saw there in Acts 31. You see, for some, this world is really an end in itself, is it not? It is really about the abundance of toys that they can collect. And it really is. I mean, we talk about it, and it's just like, is it really about your things? For some people, it truly is. And they cannot see their lives apart from their things. They identify with the things that they own. But what was happening in Acts 4 is they were using the things of this world to minister to their neighbor and to plan for the future. And I believe that's what Paul was talking about here. Those who use this world as not misusing it. And we should use this world to support our families and to plan for the future and to consider what's going to be coming down the road 100, 200, 500 years down the road. But I would argue that misuse of the world is to make the world and the things of the world an end in itself. John's going to tell us later, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life is passing away. And that's exactly what Paul is saying here. The form of this world is passing away. Do not, Paul's saying, put all your emphasis and energy into things that are going to go by the boards. Instead, use what's in this world. Use your money. Use your things to serve God and to love your neighbor. Well, that's all we have time for here this morning. You thought I was really going to do it to you, right? Because we don't have a teaching time. So you just go on and on and on. But we did mention before that following the service, we do allow for questions. I did not get as far. I didn't unpack this passage as much as I wanted to. I hope you get a chance to read it at least a couple of times this week, because there's a lot more here, and I believe there's a whole lot more that needs to be that we need to understand as far as broader principles that go well beyond just the particular verses here in this chapter. So I thank you for your kind attention, and